Welcome to this wonderful Global Merit Cafe. And as Eric said, we have two he said superstars. I'm going to say God and Goddess of medical education, and get a little divine, with going along with David's divinity connections. So let me introduce you to both of them very briefly. I can't do it justice, but I'll start with Pat. Patricia O'Sullivan is Director, Research and Development in Medical Education, Center for Faculty Educators at UCSF, that's University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine. She co-directs multiple courses there, the Health Professions Education Pathway, the Teaching Scholars Program, and provides leadership for master's and doctoral programs in health professions education. This is actually co-organized with Utrecht Center in the Netherlands. So she leads faculty. She's absolute star in faculty development for those interested in education and educational research. And her faculty development program received the Aspire for Excellence Award from AMI. And Dr. Sullivan has led the RIME, or Research in Medical Education section of the AAMC, the RIME Program Planning Committee, and Division for Professions Education of the American Education Research Association, ERA. She's a fellow of ERA, and she has multiple awards, lifetime awards, national and international awards. And I've gotten to know her slightly. I would like to get to know her more as an amazing mentor, absolutely amazing. And the term absolutely amazing applies also to the next expert discussant, and David Irby, who is Professor Emeritus of Medicine and Educational Scientist in the Center for Faculty Educators at UCSF. He was formerly the Vice Dean for Education and Director of the Office of Medical Education at the UCSF School of Medicine, and a Senior Scholar at the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. He was prior to UCSF, he was Professor of Medical Education at the University of Washington. Focus of his research has been on faculty development, clinical teaching, the learning environment, actually clinical reasoning as well. You left that out, David. For his research and leadership in academic medicine, he has received, again, numerous awards, national and international, from the AAMC, from the ERA, and he's actually one of the award winners of the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. This is almost like the Nobel Prize in Health Professions Education, and National Board of Medical Examiners. And the one thing I did want to say was his connection to Harvard Medical School goes back a long way. In 1982, 1983, he was on a sabbatical at HMS and served on the founding committee for the new pathway. It was then new, and now it's new old. And in the 2000s, he also served as a consultant to the dean twice, and he has received the Tosterson Award for Leadership in Medical Education in 2004. I could go on, and I need 2 hours, but I will stop and allow David and Pat to present their sections. So,
thank you, Subha. Let me begin by saying that Pat and I are both delighted to be here. We enjoy working together, and we enjoy working with Subha and creating this event today. So thank you for joining us as we think together about how to use faculty development to create a community of educators. In today's World Cafe, we will define what we mean by medical education and by a community of education. We'll describe 4 frames for creating such community, and then put you to work in small groups to think of a strategy for doing the same. And finally, we'll engage in discussion at the end to hear what you came up with. Pat.
Great. I'm also delighted to be here, and Dave and I have worked together for a long time. But what's really exciting about this opportunity is I think that the BEI is exemplifying a lot of what we're talking about. We're going to enrich it with some of our experiences. So we want to start with a definition of faculty development Okay, it's only 25 years old or so, but it still resonated with today's topic. So faculty development empowers faculty members to excel as educators, and we've now added in scholars and leaders to create a vibrant academic community that values teaching and learning. So even 25 years ago, Dave and his colleague, Lou-Anne Wilkerson, were thinking about the connection of faculty development's responsibility to create this community. So when you look through the literature in faculty development and academies of medical educators, you kind of get the characteristics of what this community should look like and what should this community do. So some of the key points are on this slide. It should support teachers' growth and identity. It should celebrate educational achievements. It should create a network and locally a really powerful coalition. The faculty development has to foster an organizational culture that values education, advances educators, and accelerates innovation in teaching and learning. So I think what is important is for us to figure out how those who like to lead faculty development, how they make this happen. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave, who's going to help us think some more about how leaders can make this community. Dave?
So I have to say that my favorite book on leadership is written by Bowman and Deal, and it's called Reframing Organizations. The authors argue that organizations, and we should say also communities, tend to be opaque and difficult to read, and that leaders get stuck when they only view the organization from a single lens. Or we should say, in their case, frames. So frames focus, filter, and order our experience. They give us a way of viewing or give us insights into an organization. So Bowman and Deal proposed 4 frames to guide both assessment of what's going on as well as guiding us towards action. And these include structural, human resources, political, and symbolic. We'll describe each frame and give examples of how we have sought to create a vibrant community of educators at UCSF. Our intent is not to suggest that UCSF has all the answers, because it doesn't, but rather to share examples that stimulate your thinking about these and other strategies you can employ to create community in your setting. Pat?
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk first about the structural frame. The structural frame is the social architecture that helps to organize that community. You need a coherent structure where there are some formal roles and responsibilities to achieve established goals and objectives. Again, I hope in the conversation, we'll learn a little bit more about how the BEI was organized and developed, but that's the kind of thing we're talking about. I want to give you the example from UCSF. What we did was create the Center for Faculty Educators. And we gave that 4 major charges: to lead the faculty development, to house the Academy of Medical Educators, to take care of our volunteer clinical providers, and also to be the nexus for the research in medical education. So this now creates a structure where people know where to go to get information, get advice, get to know those who are trying to create this community that we're talking about. So it really does become the hub for this community. So that's one frame, but then the next question is, well, what does that do for the individuals? You've got that organization. What do you do for individuals? And this is where the human resources lens comes really into focus. Human resources lens is really to support the individual growth and development of the faculty that does meet the organizational goals, which usually are to create a quality education for our students, residents, fellows, and peers. So one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we show that we're caring and supporting of the individuals in our community, and that we help them see how they might fit into the organization. So to do this, I'm going to use the UCSF examples. And again, I think those of you who made the introduction saw a window into the BEI examples. We have weekly activities. in order to make sure we're accessible, that people feel supported. There's something happening every week. We always have workshops, or we have people who are working on their certificates in different areas of education. We also hold a weekly educational scholarship conference called Escape. The idea was escape from what you're doing and come, and people will bring ideas, abstracts, manuscripts, and they get a group consultation from a group of educators. And we all learn from each other. It's just a fabulous way to create an informal community, a little bit like the cafe. We never know who will be there. Monthly and quarterly, every month we have an education journal club. We do a table of contents review because nobody can keep up with all the literature. So we kind of run through the table of contents of various journals. We always hold a medical education grand rounds. And our academy also has quarterly activities that are open to everybody. And finally, probably one of the hallmarks of really this development are longitudinal programs. And our key program is the Teaching Scholars Program, which is a weekly faculty development program for 1 year. And this can go into those master's and doctoral degree connections that we've established. So Dave, you want to try the other two frames?
Sure. So the next one is the political frame, and it recognizes that in every organization, there are scarce resources and often intense competition for them. This frame focuses on advocacy and political savvy to develop a power base and an agenda to advocate for education and educators. Let me illustrate this with our work again at UCSF. In terms of leadership, the Academy of Medical Educators Endowed chairs provide recognition and resources to support educational leadership at the department level. These chairs are visible leaders for education and create a community of educators within their department, often through faculty development at the department level. In terms of resources and collaborations, the Academy, the Library, and the School of Medicine pool their resources to collaboratively fund educational innovations and educational research through a single grants program that is offered annually. This creates a large community of faculty who are encouraged and engaged in innovation and the conduct of educational research. The Academy has also created a power base to advocate for educators. They have successfully changed advancement and promotion procedures, the university's online CV to include educational roles and responsibilities. They've influenced departmental pay and incentives for educators, and they have helped to create a culture that now supports educators. The political frame is all about advocacy and getting things done institutionally. The final frame is probably the least recognized, but one that can be very powerful. It creates community by celebrating and recognizing and even inspiring educators through a variety of rites and rituals, oral and written communication, and community events. Key leadership roles include being a cheerleader, a framer of experience and shared values, a creator of rituals and symbols, and a storyteller. It's about exciting and energizing people and giving them hope and meaning. We do this through graduation ceremonies, such as the teaching scholars and our master's and doctoral degree students. In fact, I'm looking forward to going to Utrecht to celebrate the graduation of one of our PhD students. Celebrations, such as the Academy induction ceremony each fall. Awards, such as annual teaching and service and scholarship awards. An educational showcase that is a week of presentations and posters of educational interventions and scholarship, workshops, and invited lecturers. And finally, we create symbolically through storytelling. And one of the places where this shows up, among others, is on our faculty development website that contains lots of stories by learners, educators, and leaders. So in summary, we have 4 lenses for thinking about how faculty development can create a community of educators, including a structural, human resources, political, and symbolic frame. Now we want to put you to work to think about which of these really excites you. Pat?
All right. Well, everybody's been on Zoom or something similar for at least nearly 2 years now. And one of the best parts of all of this is really getting to talk to your colleagues and sharing some ideas. So we're going to set 20 minutes for a small group activity. First, after you get into your small group, let's briefly introduce yourself. And here are, just 2 things to answer. Where are you from? I've seen in the chat already, we have some very global participants. And just which of those 4 frames really resonated or felt more like things you like to do? Second, please identify a scribe. And they're going to complete the Google Doc. And we will put the link to the Google Doc in once we're ready to launch the small groups. You'll go to your group number and ask the scribe to kind of fill in some of those details and be prepared to give at least a brief report out at the end of the small group time so we can use that to facilitate the discussion. Now, what are you going to do in your group? When you look at your group number, and remember, when you go into a breakout room, people always forget there is a group number up there. You just need to look for it. And when you find that and you go to the Google Doc, you'll see which frame you were assigned to do. So you may have a preferred frame, but we're going to put you to work in a different frame. And in that, we want you to design a strategy and activity that you think you would like to use for your setting, or one that you think would be really helpful in building this community. These activities I can see for the Brigham, and I know for UCSF, are what have really made us be perceived as very educationally supportive and friendly environments. So if we can put that link into chat, and it's there right now, and we're ready to go into breakout rooms. Please feel free to come out of the breakout room if you need any help. We'll be here if you need anything, but we'll be watching that Google Doc to see where your ideas are starting to populate. Okay. So one of my big questions as we're coming back in is that I noticed that one group was slower than the other groups get going. And that just happened to me, my colleague, Dave Irby. Did he talk too much? Did you ask him too many questions? Okay. I cannot figure it out, but every other group was making progress. Yes, Dr. Irby, you were commenting?
We had very robust discussion that then led into our reporting. And I also can talk, and I love faculty development. So that may have been partially my fault.
Oh, I doubt it. I just think, so it's one of the interesting discussions is that I bow back because I don't want to control the conversation. I'm excited to watch it and see what happens, but I just blame Tim. It must be much easier, but it's really exciting.
Wasn't my fault.
So he says, all right, I'll trust him. It's great.
Okay, are we all back? I think we are. So maybe the best way to move into the conversation around this would be, Pat, if you could share your screen and bring up the Google Doc, and we can get the reports through that document, starting with Group 1. And what we'll do is hear from Group 1 and then pause and ask for any group input or ideas, and then we'll move on to Group 2. So, Pat.
All righty, let me expand this. And I'm going to have to do the usual, how to make this a little bit more visible to you. So
and while she's doing that, and she's doing it incidentally so that I don't screw it up.
Yeah.
But I want to also remind people that we do have time challenges. So in your report, please be able to do it in 2 minutes if you can.
Sorry, I'm just scrolling to get this large, but I think that's what it's going to be. Does that look good?
Yeah, looking
All
good.
righty. Group 1, structural frame. In reporting out, could you introduce yourself, where you're from, just so that people have an idea of who you are?
I'll report out for us. I already introduced myself as we launched, but had several others who should weigh in at any point. But just for the sake of time, we took on that structural mindset. It took us about 5 minutes to get there, because I think as educators, we just feel like we live a little bit more in the other ones, in particular human resources frame, supporting kind of the community. But once we got our hands around it, we were very militaristic and mathematical, and that worked really well for us. So we designed a meeting that we're going to call the Interprofessional Healthcare Educators of the Future. And it's going to be a purposely built community that is clear and representative of every department in a hospital, with equal numbers, equal representation. And then we kind of have a vertical structure where, thinking like we would within a department, like let's say medicine, there are divisions. And so we thought we'd ask within each department that there'd be 6 clear representatives. There'd be a trainee, a faculty member, a non-MD scientist, an educator, and that would kind of create this very clear reporting structure. Separately, Chris was mentioning it'd be nice though to have kind of a horizontal kind of cross-cutting structure, like take, for example, an educational expert. Doesn't have to be specific to any department, but could apply to all 17 of them or whatever. And then we kind of got into some neat ideas as we were blue skying. In particular, I liked Yun Su's idea. We give out ed grants, but the structural mindset was to make the winner chosen via a formula. So it would not be just consensus. There'd be like some sort of mathematical formula. We'd meet every 2 months, and then in the intervening months, we'd have each group of 6 meet. So that was our structural mindset.
Wow, that is fabulous and innovative. I really like the fact, but I do have to laugh about your introduction of what it takes to get into the structural frame. Anybody thoughts on this idea?
I'll give our reflection, which was, we all were glad we were building it, but we're not sure we can make it work, because it takes the other frames to pull it off, kind of, I think.
I think that's a really interesting insight too, is that, because I'm trying to think like, how would could it really work? And yet at the same time, I can see it satisfying a lot of things that I hear in the background of what people want. So that's a neat way to create a different community.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's a great example of that structural frame, which for me is my go-to frame. I always want to work on goals, objectives, organizational structures. So this feels right at home.
All righty. Well, let's try the human resources, because I tend to think this is where most of us fall. So who's going to be the reporter from group 2 on human resources?
Okay. Having given everyone 2 seconds to chime in, I'm going to do it. Shubha, I'm from Boston and all over the world, basically. So our title of the community creating activity was creating a community of underrepresented minority educators, or rather bringing them into the educational leadership fold. So the brief description: design a program that brings in educational leaders, scholars, current educational leaders, scholars, administrators, etc., to do presentations, career counseling sessions, and skills building sessions in education, targeting at the trainee level. And part of this would be needs assessment to explore actual challenges or anticipated challenges that they face when they think of leadership roles in education. So activities would involve skills building, and that can, we just put a few samples here, progress meetings to help them design and discuss projects, and longitudinal programs and fellowships. So those are samples. And then networking sessions and actual sponsorship sessions as well. So some of the leaders might actually reach out and say, here are some opportunities. And mentoring activities. Frequency, we said every 2 months. I got stopped because I was going to say every 2 months and nightly dinners, but I got stopped before then.
I think the dinners may be the important ingredient in all of this. This was a beautiful example of the human resources frame because it really is around how to help individuals grow and develop. And this is a really thoughtful way of creating a community that is, I would hope, feel very supported by these kinds of activities.
And I was only the scribe. Karen was the visionary of the idea.
Great. And it was very exciting. Anybody else think about something in their human resources that would be like this? I think of our Teaching Scholars program, but it's important to really think about maybe the importance of creating a community for different groups. That sometimes that is a really helpful approach.
I'll give one just thought because I reflect on where I've had short steps myself, which is when I think of the HR frame like this, I think this is like the perfect build. But the one thing I've learned to add on is my own kind of check-in at 3, 6, 9 months, whatever you want. And the reasoning is, unless you have that kind of mindset, you can assume that you're there to support your learner, but you could be way off base that you've put all this effort into it, and then it turns out you're not even like touching what they wanted, kind of thing. So I always put in some sort of a follow-up, if you will.
Yeah, it's an interesting is, we expect reflection of our learners, and we need to build that reflection very carefully into all of our activities to make sure that we are meeting people's needs. That's a great insight. Well, being mindful of time, because this is so interesting. How about onto the political framework? People think they don't like this word, but it's really very useful. Who's our presenter from the political frame?
It's impossible to think there's not a leader when we talk about a political framework.
I can't see right now for whatever reason.
It was our group here, so I'll take it on.
Oh, thank you so much.
Go, Jess.
We felt that in the context of creating a community of educators, the most powerful political influence may well be those in senior leadership positions within that institution. And we felt that by targeting these individuals and trying to encourage them to formally recognise the efforts of educators, that this would help promote the sense of community. An awards ceremony we thought might be nice, and just the senior leaders being really visible to the community of educators. We felt that politically would go down well, and that's where we got to.
I actually thought this was brilliant. I was really impressed to see this. So I'm glad I was in that group, and I bowed out because I wanted them to be able to make sure that they could really come up with creative ideas, and it worked. It's really great.
Yeah, I think this is a place where the political and symbolic overlap, because you want the leaders to be able to articulate a vision for what education can be and to invite people into that. And it reminds me of the power of having a dean initially when I became vice dean for education at UCSF, who was in every speech he gave, education was a key component of what he talked about. And after having him screw that up a bit, I actually intervened with his speechwriter to change some of what he was talking about. So this is a brilliant idea. So very good.
Being very mindful. Let's go to this last group that definitely had a lot of ideas. Group 4. Who's going to speak for group 4? This is the symbolic frame.
So it's day 2 on the job for me, and I'm already having to speak in front of a bunch of people. So please bear with me here. So we had the symbolic frame, and as you mentioned, we spent a lot of time kind of wrapping our heads around the idea of the symbolic frame and what it meant to us. And I feel like we got to a place where we were identifying this, this identity as educator as something that is important and something that is vital and something that should be accessible and desired by everybody, right? Everybody can be an educator. And what we were starting to get to was that we wanted to create some kind of program where folks felt that their ability to identify as an educator, their ability to go down an educational path and to pass on their knowledge to other folks could be achieved regardless of maybe what credentials or letters were after their name. That education is a place where everybody can be involved. And that's kind of where we got to. So in terms of like a program or something, I'm going to just speak from my brain here, and I completely invite everybody from my group to chime in if you would like to. But what I was getting ready to suggest in our group was perhaps some kind of mentor-mentee program where there's an intentional effort put in recruiting young students that perhaps are only thinking from a clinical perspective, how to become the best clinician possible, and maybe not necessarily thinking about an educational path, and then hooking them up with folks on varying degrees of the spectrum of education, folks that have completely dedicated their lives to it, and maybe other folks that are at the beginning of that journey. And within that kind of mentorship program, weaving in this idea that no matter where you go, no matter what you do, education is going to be a highly valued aspect of your professional and your personal identity, and that there is going to be opportunities and spaces for you to explore that. And the idea of this kind of mentor-mentee program would be that you could start to see all the different avenues and opportunities there are out there for you to see where you could find your home in education.
Great. Thank you. Good work for your second day. And I can imagine eventually having symbols like pins that sort of identify what people are seen as where they are in their trajectory, what kinds of things they like to mentor, just some, kind of thinking about that symbolism.
Yep.
Dave, are you going to say something?
I think we're at about time for wrap up. So
Right.
You want to make some general comments, Pat?
No, I think it's great. We thank you very much for doing this. I hope it sort of inspired you to kind of think of different ways that you could be activating your community and realize that these things have to work a little bit together, but certainly even focusing on one area alone will help to enrich this community. And just thank you very much for having us today. And I know that Shubha, you need to wrap this up.
Okay, but before you do, let me just say one thing, that like learning theories, they shine a light on one area, but leave dark other areas. So the great thing about this is it gives 4 different lights, if you will, to shine on an organization. And as members of my group, the Symbolic, said, all of these sort of work together. They intermesh oftentimes. But I want to thank you also. It was great to meet the members of my group and to work with medical students who are part of it, like Nikita, and my old buddy, Emil Petrusa, who I haven't seen in more than a decade. So thank you all, and over to Subha.
Thank you, David and Pat. It was an incredible pleasure to hear you both again and again. So I just want to wrap up. I think thus far we've been talking about formal faculty development, building organizations like UCSF, like the BEI. But I do want to also encourage people to think of faculty development from an informal community building perspective, which is one thing I have been actively engaged in. And regardless of the informality, the 4 frames are just as important. The structural, so the informal communities also need objectives and roles which need to be defined to have an impact. And it should allow members of the community to have a peripheral or central participation, the flexibility. Then in terms of human resources, I looked at the empowerment part, and I like Judy McKim, whom many of you have heard. She describes the leadership triad as having leaders, managers, and active followers, and rotation of roles so that everyone stays motivated. Psychological safety and inclusivity are really critical. Political, it can have even informal communities can have a presence and advocate for the mission and harness social media, which Christina is an expert in, to showcase and disseminate ideas. And finally, symbolic, regardless of the formality, informality, and infrastructure, a vision, a clear vision, and a shared sense of purpose are important. And we can always celebrate successes of individual members of the community and telling the story. I actually told a story at the Asia Pacific Medical Education Conference in a plenary, and apparently it was wonderful to hear the story. So storytelling about this informal community. And people asked me, how can I join this community? I said, there's no such thing as joining, you just be the community. With that, I want to thank David and Pat once again for such an enjoyable Global Med Ed Cafe session. And thank you everyone for attending and participating.